let's talk errata one last time. But I don't want to talk today about what the errata is or what the changes are to the book. What I want to talk to you about is this sort of philosophical nature of errata and how that could impact your game at your table. If you're curious what I'm talking about and you want to know more, stay tuned. What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here. And let's talk errata. So I did a whole nother video, there'll be a link in the description, where I basically went over the newest errata and the Sage Advice Compendium, and then at a request from all of you, I did a video about the Player's Handbook errata. I'm sorry to the folks who thought that was a new video. I thought I made it very clear in that video that I was just going over the errata from start to finish for several folks out there who didn't know what it was. So if you got kind of clickbaited by that video, I'm sorry. But the point that I want to bring up today, and it's interesting, is there is no right answer to this question because it's really, again, the thought of this, the process of this video and the point behind it is to evoke conversation and thought between you and I and everybody else in the comments. So the thought is, how does errata impact your game? So my point being, let's say I'm a DM and I sit down at a table to run a game for a group of players, and I'm using my 2014 Player's Handbook that has the 2014 versions of all of the abilities. And you sit down at the table, and you are using a newer printed version of the Player's Handbook, and, you say you're going to cast Contagion, and I say, okay, make your attack roll, and you make your attack roll, and you're like, cool, the enemy's poisoned, and I look at him like, hold on, and I flip to my copy of the Player's Handbook, and I look at Contagion, and in my 2014 version, it doesn't apply the poison condition, but in your newer version of the Player's Handbook, it does. So what do you do? What's the process? How do we handle this as players and DMs? And like I said, there is no right answer. Hopefully, you're at a good table with a good group of people and they can understand that maybe that's what this is. And again, this is to help spread the knowledge of the fact that this stuff exists, for right or for wrong, because some people are going to say, well, I'm going to choose to ignore the errata. But then it comes down to, do you ignore the errata that you don't like? Or do you ignore the errata at all? Are we saying we're playing with only the 2014 version of the Player's Handbook? Do I need to make sure, does everybody have to go out and print the errata out and put it in their Player's Handbook so they have it for reference? And if you're playing online and using a digital tool set like D&D Beyond, they get the updates applied to them automatically whenever those updates come out, so you might never know. But there are examples, as I discussed in the Player's Handbook video, where things are significantly changed. Like if you do decide to play Beastmaster Ranger, and I'm using, as the DM, the original version of the Player's Handbook, and you're using a newer version, at level 7, your animal companion's attacks are magic for the purposes of overcoming damage resistance, and in mine, they're not. Now let's say, now you tell me, okay, my animal companion attacks and it does 14 damage. Now, let's say I don't have that version of the Player's Handbook and I don't know, and I say, okay, and I just do the math behind the screen, and I don't tell you that I took your 14 damage and halved it by 7 because I know that this enemy has resistance to attacks from non-magical attacks. I know that, but maybe you don't know that, and I'm not telling you that because I remember in my copy of the Player's Handbook that the damage, that your attacks for your pet are not magic. So I'm like, okay, 14 turns into 7, takes 7 points of damage. If I don't do what I just did there, where I illustrate that out loud, where I'm talking through, all right, 7 points of damage. And you go, hang on, well, what do you mean 7 points of damage? I said I did 14. Oh, yeah, he's resistant to non-magical attacks, but my Beastmaster, my pet's attacks, my animal companion's attacks are magic. Do you have a magic item that does it? Well, no. So what are you talking about? Well, look, right here on page whatever of the Player's Handbook, it says the attack, they're magical for the purposes of overcoming damage resistance. And I go, huh. And I flip through to my book and it says that they're not. I mean, again, I'm in the know. Me personally, if I was the DM, I'm in the know that these kind of things exist. So I'd say, oh, you must have a newer printed version than mine. We'll go with yours. Or, you know what, that was probably in the errata. I missed that. Okay, we'll move on. That could be a contention, though, depending on the person and the DM. And, like, not to say that this is everybody and for right or wrong for the table, but some DMs don't like to be challenged out on rules at the table. And this could maybe fall into, like, a rules lawyering concept, which always seems to be designated as a negative thing, you know, rules lawyering. And I don't want to really go down the rabbit hole of where to stand on rules lawyering, but in theory, it's not rules lawyering, it's applying the rules as written. You're just applying the rules from the current published version of the book versus the old version of the book. And that's a big difference. For those of you who, whether your thoughts one way or another on Healing Spirit, the second level spell for like druids and clerics, that has a massive change from being an unlimited healing, you know, out of combat spell to do 10d6 healing in the course of a minute to as many people that can run through it, to now only healing a d6 equal to 1 plus your spellcasting modifier. Those are drastically different numbers. And not to say that you should or should not build your character around a spell or a build based around something that this thing being ruled differently could just kill your character, because maybe your character should potentially be built a little deeper than just that. But again, I'm not going to tell you how to play your character or what you should and shouldn't do, but that is something that could happen. For example, the Four Elements Monk. I've made my thoughts pretty clear on where I stand on what I think about it. But in the original Player's Handbook, the Water Whip ability, which is one of the arguably best abilities that the Four Elements Monk has, was a bonus action, which makes it a actually very useful ability and has a lot of good utility to synergize with other monk abilities, letting you still use your action for an attack, and you could do one before the other, and then it works out well. And let's say I'm the player, and I'm using my 2014 version of the Player's Handbook, because realistically, right, if you buy a book when an edition of Dungeons & Dragons come out, and they don't make a big push or a big notice on social media, or maybe you don't care and you don't, you know, you buy the books when the books come out, and then you just have them on your shelf and you use them to play the game. Like, probably a large majority of people, and what people used to do years ago, because you didn't have the internet and errata and that kind of stuff out there. But like, you know, if you just buy the books and play from the books as it stands and don't clue into any of this, which is totally fine, and your book isn't falling apart at the binding, then okay, you're playing with that. But like, you're all pumped to play your monk, your Four Elements Monk, and okay, I use a bonus action to do my Water Whip, and the DM goes, well, it's not a bonus action, it's an action. And you say, well, no, it's not. Look, my Player's Handbook right here clearly states that it's a bonus action. But me, the DM, I'm putting myself in the bad guy position, and a lot of these say, well, no, it's an action. Look, it's right here in the Player's Handbook. The newer version of the Player's Handbook, the recent printing, they changed it to an action. We go, well, that sucks. I never would have picked that ability. Now we're in the middle of combat, and now you're trying to use your thing that you thought it worked one way. Now, realistically, again, were it me in that scenario, I'd say, you know what, you're probably right. I kind of like it better as a bonus action. Let's just rule it as that and go with that going forward. But people may say, well, no, it's an action. They updated the book for a reason. It's an action. You have to use it as an action. And that may automatically put a sour taste in that player's mouth because it kind of feels like you're shutting them down, maybe. Again, I'm not trying to speak one way or another on how people feeling in good players, good DMs, bad players, bad DMs. But that's the point, again, of this video is, what do you think? How does this work? Do you announce this up front when you sit down to play a game? Hey, folks, just so you know, we're using the most recent published version of all of the published sources from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. There's errata for several handbooks out there. If you haven't, there's a link. It's free. Please download it, familiarize yourself with the updated versions of everything in case that impacts the character you want to play. Again, in some instances, I think like Abidalzim's Horrid Wilting, that spell got updated in a previous errata when Xanathar's came out, and they increased the damage by like 3 or 4 d8s. Like, the damage went up significantly, probably because the folks at Wizards were like, wow, for an 8th level spell that doesn't do a ton of damage, let's pump the damage up a little bit, which is a good thing. You, the player, rolling 10d8 or 8d8, are like, well, now I roll 12d8 or whatever it is. That's great. That's a boon for you. But at the same point, right, is this one of those scenarios where I'm going to tell you that this thing is different because of an errata, because it benefits me, but when it's a detriment to me, I won't, right? Like, so I'll tell you, oh, well, Abydos Hard Wilting does more damage. It was updated in an errata, but I won't tell you that Healing Spirit was updated in an errata because that impacts me negatively, but the other one impacts me positively, right? So, again, that gets into the dynamics of players and DMs, but, it's just, thankfully, we're not playing a card game, right? Like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, where erratas and things like that can basically shut down a deck or completely destroy a way you were playing the game to the point where it's really not viable. These are small, minor changes, although, as I've stated, a couple of them could impact your gameplay. And I actually did see that Water Whip example of the bonus action versus action. I actually was in a room where I saw that debate go down at a table. It was not the table I was playing at. And I was leaving because my game was ending, and, this other game was still going on. But there were 2 players' handbooks out on the table next to each other, and the DM and the monk player were like, well, what do we do? Action versus bonus action. And, like, it halted the gameplay while they figured out how they were going to rule it. Because in theory, both are right depending on the point in time, right? If you're going to say, I'll allow any published source, or not even any published source. This is the player's handbook we're talking about. This is the source. And again, technically, both are right. They are both a version of the player's handbook. One is just newer and therefore invalidates the previous one. But Wizards of the Coast isn't going to reimburse you for your older version of the player's handbook. They're not going to let you trade in your 2014 version of the player's handbook for a free 2018 version of the player's handbook. That's just poor business model in their respect, because they're reprinting because they're selling out of things, and then they're taking the time to update those as reprints are needed. So like I said, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm very curious what your thoughts are and where you land on this concept of, like, is this a thing to discuss up front? Does this put you as more of an advocate for digital tool sets over physical books? Because the digital tool sets, if you go to look at them, they're there. But again, that's another example, right? So if a digital tool set, again, I'll use D&D Beyond as an example. If you're using it one way and you go to cast your spell one week, and the errata gets pushed through midweek before your next session, and you sit down to use your spell again, and it's an entirely different spell because of the changes. Again, we'll use Healing Spirit as an example where the functionality of it is drastically different. Do you ask the DM, hey, I took this spell because of the way it worked before, and it's one of my limited spells known as a ranger. Can I swap it out? Are you cool with that? And, like, the DM might say, well, no, you picked that spell and it's been an integral part of your character and the way you helped heal and sustain the party so far through the campaign. But then the player says, yeah, but I picked it because it was good at healing, and now it's not as good. I think I could make better use of something. And again, that sparks a conversation, and hopefully the DM and the player are both mature enough and can figure out a compromise to make everybody happy. But that obviously will not always be the case, and it could lead to a player leaving, a DM quitting, the session ending early, the campaign ending early. Maybe those are a little on the extreme side, but, campaigns and things, we all know that D&D campaigns are very fragile, right? All it takes is a couple people missing with scheduling issues, and the whole thing falls apart. So when you start throwing in rules and different book printings and stuff like that, it could go that way as well. So I don't really know. Like I said, I'll give you, and now I guess to close this video out, I'll give you my opinion on this, because I'm sure someone would have asked it in the comments. My opinion is Wizards of the Coast puts out these erratas and these updates to the books because they recognize they were going to, it's a business model thing, right? Hey, we sold out of this run of the book. We need to make another printing. Let's go in and take a look in case there's anything we think is a flub, a miss, or whatever, before these books go to print, we're gonna do a once-over of it again, check the most frequently asked questions, things you constantly get berated about online, forums and whatnot. Okay, this is we should add a clarification here because it's come up enough that people want to know about it. So before we put this book to print and have this issue, this typo, whatever it is, let's fix it and then we'll publish it out. So that's the business model behind it. And my thoughts are, in theory, right, you should probably be using the most recent. I'm not trying to advocate anybody go out and spend more money to get new versions of books, because the errata is for free on the internet, and it may seem like a bad idea, and I can understand this too, but like you may just take a pen and like cross out, like if there's a word that was removed or a sentence removed, you might just cross it out like in your actual book with a marker or a pen. Then that fixes it. You've just errataed your own book based on Wizards' recommendations. You could do that. I tend to lean more towards, you know what I guess I'll say, as I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer for this. I tend to lean towards use what the most recent version of things are because they're that way for a reason, but new is not always better. So if some of these scenarios we brought up, like personally, like I said, Water Whip was originally written as a bonus action, I like it as a bonus action. If you're going to try to play the 4 Elements Monk as it's written in the player's handbook, God bless you, first of all. But second of all, you should at least be able to have the Water Whip be a bonus action because it's fun, it's cool, and it'll make the character have more fun and let them do more cool things. And I agree with that. I want my players to have fun. I want to run the game that they want to play, and I want it to be fun. Now, does that mean if they come up with some suggestion for their own homebrew or errata to a spell that makes it ridiculously broken and will make every encounter trivial, then no, I'm not going to allow that. But I also am not a person that plays 100% stick to my guns of rules as written. I homebrew a lot of stuff. I have a whole series here on YouTube where I go back and fix things that I don't think are working well in 5e, and that's because I think that some things do need adjustments. Will Wizards of the Coast look at those videos and input any of that stuff into future reprintings of the books? Probably not, if I'm being real. Maybe if we're lucky, that Unearthed Arcana that was about alternative class features will end up becoming something we get in a future book, so they can sort of fix things that way by saying, like, these are all optional rules that you don't need to have if you don't want to. And you can put these in your game, adding this new spell list to the Ranger, and this new spell list to the Bard, adding these new abilities and things. And honestly, I think that's probably one of the biggest things Wizards could do, is just flag things as optional. Here is an optional rule for you. Because when you put that operative word of optional, that means I get to use it if I want, but it's not part of the balance of the game and not like a thing that I need to worry about that is now the law. Like, for example, flanking as a thing that people always talk about. Flanking is an optional combat rule. I personally, Ted from Nerd Immersion, I don't enjoy it, so I don't use it. But you might love it, so you use it in your game. But they could just put stuff in there, alternative class features as optional rules if you want to use them. I don't know if they're going to still make that an official published thing we'll get in a book, because I don't know how well that was received, or if they want to kind of admit that they need to fix some things. But there's a reason we get new editions of Dungeons & Dragons, so if enough things seem to be broken and people complain about a lot of stuff not working or needing to be adjusted, that kind of is the milestone for let's can this edition and make a 6th edition or a 5.5, right? I don't know where the decision was to go from like 3 to 3.5 versus 4 to 5, but I honestly do feel like we could probably deal with a 5.5e Dungeons & Dragons and then like fix a lot of the issues that people have brought up. And then again, you'd be re-releasing the books. But one of the nice things about 5th edition is you're not really going to have to buy too much. The adventures will probably be pretty much the same. So you'd only be releasing the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, the Dungeon Master Guide. Xanathar's, everyone forgets about Sword Coast Adventures Guide, so you probably just forget that entirely. Maybe Mordenkainen's, for the races, and then whatever this new book we may or may not get in the future. So I don't know. There's not too many new books you'd have to release if you did go to like a 5.5e. And then again, you could make 5.5e a printed book and then release errata for all the 5th edition books that people could download for free to update things to 5.5e. And that's a good way to sell more books. So you're welcome, Wizards. That one's for free. Long story, ridiculously long story short. There's no right answer. The newer stuff makes sense in some applications, but if you don't like it, don't use it. But the best thing you can do as a DM or a player is say, hey, I like this. Are we going to use this in the game? Or, hey, I like this part of the new errata as the DM. I'm going to run this in my game, but I think this is stupid, so I won't. But as long as you have that communication and you're clear about it up front, then everybody will be in the know and you'll prevent any kind of future issues from happening. So that's my little kind of 20-minute rant video here about errata, but I really do very, very much want to hear from you all in the comments. What are your thoughts about errata? I saw a lot of comments on the previous video where people were saying they think it's necessary, but then a lot of people were thinking, you know, again, sort of in a similar vein to like a video game patch where they're like, we should get these more often because if we get them more often, then we can fix major issues we have with the game, like the Ranger and that kind of a thing. And I don't feel like Wizards wants to go that route because they don't want to just... They're purposefully reduced book bloat, as it were, by not making a ton of books to help limit the need for updating things. Because that was a thing they did in like 3.5. I don't really know 4E. But they would release a new source book and it would sort of almost retcon a previous book. Because, so a great example I can give you is it wasn't in the original printings of 3.5, but it would be like, let's play 5th edition without bonus actions being a thing in the game. And like 2 years into it, we're going to add bonus actions as a whole new thing you can do now. Because that's what they did in 3.5. Like there was a thing called a swift action, which is very similar to a bonus action in a lot of respects. That wasn't in the player's handbook. Like if you read the player's handbook, it's not in there. So they added that, like a whole new action economy after the fact, right? So there were things, they went to that extreme level. So I think the errata is good. A lot of you basically said, I'm just flipping through the comments right now, is really good, but it needs to be done right. A simple word fix could probably get away with being double-checked by another designer, but errata involving significant mechanical changes needs careful playtesting, possibly via Unearthed Arcana, before officially released to the public. When done right, it often goes too far and just becomes... When not done right, rather, it often goes too far and just becomes a nerf bat. Thank you, Nathan, on YouTube, on the comments for that. A lot of people brought up that, you know, card games get a lot of errata. Other forms of media also get errata. Let's see. A lot of references to basically people telling me Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! Get erratas. Different ways to tell the printing. Yeah, that's pretty much the general consensus, just reading through the comments. I hate the way Wizards does erratas. The first time I read through the wrong version of the book, it was just confusing. They need to add more context. I agree with this. They need to add more context to their errata documents to not just say third line deleted. They should basically give you almost like a track changes. Like this is what it was. This line has been deleted, but they show you what that line was so you can reference it. Or like if it now reads this, what did it read before? It used to read like this. It now reads like this. So if you're reading through the errata and not like reading it next to your player's handbook, you can understand what the different things are. A lot of people said, you know, why aren't they making PDFs? Because then you could just update the PDF. Errata is rarely good. They never change the things you think they should change, and often nerf things that you like. Back in the day, encyclopedias periodically released erratas and updates. A lot of people asking about the Proton Pack in the background, which I forgot to turn it on, so sorry guys. I guess with D&D Beyond, they don't have to now, but it would be nice if WotC released its products in PDF. Yep. So errata is good. It keeps the game updated and fresh. No need to have a 6.5 simply due to the amount of errata, as it might encourage business practices such as reprinting and reselling of the books with minor additions. But the way errata is communicated and organized is not the best. They need to implement it in a better way. Errata is important. Either WotC maybe made a mistake in the printing, with spells or items that didn't exist, or because they found the rule as written currently doesn't align with the intended purpose of the rule. These books are written by people, so they aren't perfect. That's a very diplomatic answer. Thank you, Stretch. Yeah. So, long story short, again, people have mixed opinions on it as well. The general consensus from the comments was errata is good, but it needs to be done well, and the way Wizards is doing it for 5th edition could be improved. And I would agree with that. Better documents. I would also love if they gave us the design philosophy for why they changed something. Did they change things from action to bonus action because they thought it was too powerful? Did they change it from one thing to another because it was too weak? Did they change this because so many people begged them to change it on social media? Did they change it because this was a flub in their original design, or an unpublished version of it made it to publish? That kind of a thing. Whatever the thoughts are, I would love to know in our errata document that, give me a little sidebar text that says this is the reason why we changed this. The more clear you are in communicating with why you change things, Wizards, the better we'll feel about it. Or at least we'll know why we want to complain. Anyway, that added another 10 minutes to this video. So thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. We are approaching 30K subscribers, which is pretty nuts, considering in December we were at 10. So we are just blowing up like wildfire here. So my new goal, my birthday, is July 12th. I'd love to have 50,000 subscribers here on YouTube by July 12th. Do you think I'm crazy? Can I possibly make that happen? Well, really, it's up to you all. So if you haven't subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. Click that little notification bell so you can stay up to date on the uploads that I put out. I've been trying to crank out more content than I ever have, more frequently than I ever have. Occasionally, I do miss a day or two of videos just because I don't have time to think about it, or I'm waiting for my Patreon folks to vote on what the next video topic should be, and I want to give them ample time to do so. So again, I guess I'll throw that out there. There's a Patreon link in the description as well as on the end card. There'll be a link that'll take you directly to my Patreon if you want to check that out. If you don't, it's totally cool. I get it. So yeah, I will be back with more videos in the near future covering fixing. I just spent a good 2 hours writing down a bunch of stuff to try to fix the 5e Ranger, but 2 hours seems like way too short an amount of time to fix that dumpster fire. So if you made it to the end of this video, I really do appreciate you. That actually does help me and the channel out quite a bit the longer you watch and stay engaged with the video. So I appreciate it. This heart is for you guys. I'll see you all next time.